And yet, here's something that I think we need to think about. Whenever we consider these possibilities, we need to constantly be mindful of the fact that we love to scare the hell out of a film.
Warning, this is not entertainment.
Hello, fellow sapiens and other sentient beings. I hope that you're well wherever you're hearing this episode. Right as I hit the record button, I started thinking, when was the last time we did a quick hit episode on Eschaton? For those of you who don't know what that is, when the podcast started over a year and a half ago now, we shortly thereafter started a format where we would do 10 to 15 minute update episodes on ticker items, things that would be in the news at that moment, things that you would see on the ticker screen if you're watching mainstream media. And we tried to put a little bit of a spin on it, a fringe spin, if you will, what's going on for real, what's really going on behind the scenes, that type of thing. We kind of got away from it because, number one, those episodes didn't get nearly as many downloads as the full-length episodes tend to get. And number two, I quickly found that there are other people right here, even on this network, for example, the Fringe Radio Network, that were doing a much better job than I ever could. People who always seem to have their ear to the ground and put out really well-polished and well-researched content about current events. So I stopped doing it, thinking that it was redundant and seemed like my audience didn't really want to hear me talk about what's going on in the news. So we got away from it. Now, I did say, I think way back when we did our last one, maybe a year ago now, that if something urgent came up or something really curious that was a head-scratcher popped up, that I wouldn't hesitate to jump back up in the mic and talk about it. So lo and behold, that's what happened here in the last week or two. I'm sure many of you, especially those of you who get this show through the Fringe Radio Network, you probably have already listened to several podcasts dealing with this topic, and that topic is the Sunspot Solar Observatory in New Mexico. Now, I have kept my mouth shut about this for the last couple of weeks, even as I've listened to tons and tons of other media outlets talking about it. Some people frantically panicking, and I'm getting text messages from people, emails, people saying, what's going on? What the heck is this all about? For those of you who don't know, just a really quick 30-second background, the Sunspot Solar Observatory it's an astronomical observatory in New Mexico that is always pointed at the sun. Now, it's in a very remote location. In fact, it's right outside of White Sands National Monument, which has been made famous by this podcast. Just kidding, but it's a beautiful national monument that is famous because it's in a very secluded area. It's a beautiful, beautiful white sand desert. I mean, just for miles, you see nothing but beautiful white sands. Some of the military scenes and the RV scenes in the movie Independence Day with Will Smith, where he's dragging the alien through the desert on the back of the parachute. Yeah, that's White Sands National Monument. But I've talked about it before on this podcast because during the famous road trip that my family and I went on back in the summer of 2018, we spent a couple of days there, and it is gorgeous. Now, the reason why it's important that this observatory is right next to White Sands National Monument is because the White Sands Missile Range is also located right there. Now, this is an Air Force military testing site where they test missiles, obviously, as well as Holloman Air Force Base. I believe it's called Holloman. I have it right here in front of me. Let me pull it up. But in any case, while I was out there, and yes, it is Holloman Air Force Base, we camped outside of the tent, just laying in the sand for a while. We would just lay out at night under the most beautiful sky you've ever seen. I've seen very few places where the sky is as beautiful as it is there. And we'd look up at the sky and we'd watch the fighter jets just do practice runs all night long. They'd take off. You'd see them in the distance. They'd go on their little sortie, and then they'd come back, they'd land, and then they'd take off again, and they would just do this all night long. It was really cool to watch. And in the distance, over near El Magordo, this is just to the east of White Sands National Monument. If you look it up on a map, you'll see what I'm talking about. That's where the Sunspot Observatory is. It's up on a little mountain up there. And this place a couple of weeks ago was shut down. And when I say shut down, I mean the FBI swooped in like nobody's business and they took the place over. Not only did they take the place over, but there was a complete media blackout. They kicked out all the staff that works there. They got rid of any outside presence, and they wouldn't even let the local authorities in. And this is where it started to get weird. And this is why the conspiracy crowd, started going crazy, just losing their minds. People are like, what is going on? And rightly so. Something like that happens. People want answers. So in the midst of all the outrage at the beginning, people are saying, what's going on? Why is the FBI interested in a solar observatory? What the heck could possibly going on? And the natural default response, you guessed it, aliens, right? There's aliens. There's going to be some sort of contact made, and they had to go here and take over to cover it up so that it didn't get out to the public. Now, there's a popular saying within astronomical circles, especially within NASA, that, quote unquote, it's never aliens. It's never aliens until it is. But in this case, once more, I'm going to have to be the bearer of bad news and say this was not aliens. As much as I would like it to be something as exciting and extraterrestrial as that, there's really strong evidence coming out now to suggest that this was much more terrestrial in nature, but no less frightening. And that's what I want to talk about. And this is the reason why I was compelled to do a little quick hit episode on what the heck went down in New Mexico in the past couple of weeks. Now, as I record this on the 21st of September, day before the autumn equinox, the observatory has reopened. It opened actually on Monday this past week, and everything's starting to go back to normal. But while it was closed, nobody, as I said, had access. The only information we had was a report that was released by AURA. Now, AURA it's an acronym that stands for the Association of Universities for Research in Astronomy. Now, they're an affiliate of the Sunspot Solar Observatory. They released a report that says, we, AURA, have been cooperating with an ongoing law enforcement investigation of criminal activity that occurred at Sacramento Peak, end quote. And that was it. Ongoing law enforcement investigation of criminal activity. The reason why people started scratching their heads was saying, okay, law enforcement's there to investigate illegal activity. Well, then why the heck do we need a blackout of the entire site? And not only do we need a blackout, but we aren't even letting the local authorities get involved, which is a real head scratcher, because usually federal agencies will partner with local authorities if there's some sort of criminal investigation going on within their jurisdiction. Well, lo and behold, the local sheriff, who was none too pleased about not having access to the site and getting the inside scoop of what's going on, he released a report. He met with reporters. I shouldn't say he released a report. He was quoted while he was speaking to a reporter, and this is what he said. For the FBI to get involved that quick and to be so secretive about it, there must have been a lot of stuff going on up there. I mean, there was a Black Hawk helicopter, a bunch of people around antennas, and work crews on towers, but nobody would tell us anything, end quote. So this is the local sheriff. He's saying that he saw a Black Hawk helicopter come in and land at the observatory, and that there were people up on the antennas and all sorts of work crews. And he's saying, look, they would not let us in whatsoever. The second thing that drove the conspiracy community nuts is that there was a death reported in the area right around the same time of the closing. A hiker, apparently, died in White Sands National Monument. And this is where I can lend a little bit of expertise, or at least some credence to the official story here. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not somebody who often buys the official story. And here there's really no official story to buy. Criminal investigation, that's the extent of it. Sure, whatever. But I can tell you that it is not uncommon, and it is not difficult, and it is not even really a stretch of the imagination to imagine that a hiker would have died right around the time of this happening. Hikers die in White Sands a lot. I mean, you can die in that desert so easily. There is not much out there by way of shelter from the sun or water. So if you take a wrong turn, or if you're just in bad health and you go out on one of these trails, you could very, very well pass out or just die of dehydration out there, and nobody would even see you. There's just so much open space out there. That seems to be the case of what happened here. I don't know all the details about the person who passed in White Sands National Monument, but having been there just in the past 12 months, this is by no means a stretch to imagine that, a hiker would have passed at the same time that this event happened. Now, before we go any further, and before I tell you what I'm very, very confident did happen at Sunspot Observatory, I want to tell you what didn't happen. We already kind of negated the alien hypothesis. there's just no reason to suspect that this is any sort of extraterrestrial activity or some sort of disclosure. For number one, I don't know why the FBI would be involved with that. I know it's kind of alphabet soup when you get into these types of government secrecy situations, but that would be more CIA, I would imagine, maybe some other sort of black ops that we wouldn't even know about. But I don't think the FBI would be the ones running the show in that situation. And by all accounts, even by the sheriff's account, it does seem to be the FBI that was running things here. Number two, I don't think this is any sort of false flag event or the government's intentionally leaking this information or creating this hysteria to direct attention elsewhere. I think this is a genuine threat, and a lot of people have been saying, at least on YouTube and in other media outlets, that they think this is a false flag incident or a forerunner to some sort of alien disclosure. I've seen all sorts of YouTube videos in the last week or so that have been saying things like that. Paul Begley, who has a really popular YouTube channel, has been peddling some of those kinds of theories, and I just want to say that's almost certainly not the case of what's going on here. What happened at Sunspot Observatory is this. So on Reddit, and this really slipped through the cracks, there was a tweet that was published. Somebody got a snapshot of it because it was taken down almost immediately after. Somebody who was on the inside, allegedly, somebody who was in the know, and maybe I can share a picture of this tweet later because I doubt you're going to find it on Reddit anymore, but this was available to, pretty much anybody who wanted to see it right up until the time this started to gain a lot of momentum, and the story got big. But within the first couple of days, this was available. And what the tweet said was that the Chinese were spying on White Sands missile range tests via antennae array at the observatory site. So there you go. This certainly justifies and explains why it would be a complete blackout. There's one thing that the government takes more serious than anything else, and that is national security. If they got even a hint that a foreign power was spying on a U.S. military facility, they would come in there real fast, shut everything down, and completely put the scene and everything in the immediate geographic radius on complete lockdown. And it's very believable. Like I said, spending a few days out there camping and hiking last week, I mean, this is right in the middle of a large Air Force base and a missile test site. I mean, the missile test site is visible from parts of White Sands National Monument, and the Air Force base is as well. So it's not far-fetched at all that the Chinese could have hacked or gained access to the antennae there and started spying on missile tests that were being conducted by the military. I'm pretty confident that's what this is all about. The Chinese were involved. Now, this is no less concerning than extraterrestrials, from my opinion. If you guys are longtime listeners, you probably heard the Cold War series back at the beginning. There's a reason why that was one of the first episodes we did on Eschaton, because if we are going to end up in an apocalyptic situation in the near future, my money is firmly in the camp of Russia, China, or a combination of the two being the facilitators of it. Now, I don't think the Chinese government is any more devious or secretive than our own, and I certainly don't think they want a war. I think they're just doing their due diligence when it comes to espionage and spying. I'm sure we do the exact same thing in the Eastern Hemisphere. However, this is something that the U.S. government is not going to tolerate. So if they got wind of the Chinese or the Russians or anybody for that matter spying on us, even if it was Venezuela, I mean, they'd shut it down quickly. So rest assured, this is not aliens. Ignore the talking heads who are telling you that we're about to have some sort of alien disclosure or the government's covering up some sort of alien encounter or something strange going on with the sun with solar flares. I've heard that one too. In this situation, it's all about national security, and keep your eye on China because there might be some retaliation and blowback here. Don't be surprised if you hear something going down in a few weeks where the U.S. gets caught or gets exposed spying on some Chinese military facility, because typically these things are tit for tat like that. But just keep your eyes open, stay sharp, keep your ear to the ground, and don't buy into the most hyperbolic, most extreme conclusions that people are talking about when it comes to situations like this. I'll be one of the first people to call BS when it smells like it, but this really does not smell like it. If you do the due diligence and if you've been to the area, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. This is a very, very popular military site with a lot of activity, and it makes perfect sense that somebody like China or Russia would be trying to infiltrate U.S. secrets via that location. So I'm not going to say sleep easy because this might be more terrifying than extraterrestrial encounters, but at least we can put the more outlandish theories to bed on this one. If If you have any questions, if you want to know more about White Sands or anything, in that location, let me know. I spent some time there, and it's a really cool place. I love talking about it. But it's also a very strange place. Not very far from Roswell, New Mexico either. So take that for what it's worth. But it's a really interesting place, a lot of military activity. And I think you're going to hear more about this covert situation in the future. Before we go, I wanted to give a little bit of an update on episode 36, where I talked about an experience my son had with what I deem to be a paranormal encounter via lucid dreaming, or what might be called astral projection. Now, I'm not going to recount that whole story, but just for those who didn't listen to it, go back and check it out. But if you want an update, I did post a picture of the drawing on the Eschaton Facebook page, so it's there for anyone to see if you want to check it out. I got a lot of responses from listeners via email, so thank you all for the thoughtful responses. Some of you wrote really long emails and clearly put a lot of thought into this, so thank you. I did see kind of a hegemony around conclusions. I think a lot of you come from the same perspective in terms of what you thought this was attributable to, and you may be right. I have no idea. What I will say is I'll just reiterate that this did not seem like a negative or evil entity that was contacting or speaking to my son in this dream state. So again, make of that what you will. I know some of you had some interesting theories on what that meant, but in confidence, I won't talk about all those emails on the air. But if anybody, again, has questions or wants to know more about that situation, feel free to shoot me an email. I just wanted to give you an update and let you know everything's gone back to normal pretty much here. But he does still remember almost all the details. We were just talking about it this morning, actually, and it hasn't faded with time. So I know it left a big impression on him. Thank you all for your thoughts and your prayers. I know some of you really did have a genuine concern about the situation. So I just wanted to give you an update, let you know all is well. I'm not any closer to having a working theory of what I think is going on, but I do think that this was some sort of paranormal experience involving maybe a combination of astral projection, time travel, and encounters with other sentient beings. So put the crackpot hat on me if you think that I'm nuts, but I don't know. I think there's something to this story. So stay tuned, and if there are further developments, I'll let you know. But again, thank you all for your thoughts and prayers and your genuine concern. A lot of email outreach and support, so thank you for that. And one last thing really quick, I haven't been doing this enough lately, but I want to say thank you to our Patreon supporters. If you're not a patron for this show, I'd ask that you consider becoming one. It really does help us sustain the podcast, helps us also advertise and market the show. That's what is pretty much all of the dollars that come into this podcast right now are being used for that purpose, to market and advertise the show. So thank you for those who do sustain us and support us in that way. So shout out to Philip Walter, Tanya Hoffman, Martin Willow, Jason Launchbury, and Patrick Jacks. Thank you all for your generosity and your willingness to support this show. It completely blows my mind that anybody considers this show worth donating to, and let alone worth listening to. We continue to grow, and more people are finding the podcast, and thanks to the help of these patrons, more and more people will continue to find it. So thank you to all of you. And again, sorry to burst your bubble, those of you who had your hearts set on alien encounters or some sort of false flag government conspiracy, but I'm sure there will be no shortage of those things in the future. But in this specific situation, keep your eyes on the east, folks, because there are some interesting and genuinely frightening things going on between our government and the Chinese government, as well as the Russian government. Those things we talked about in the early episodes of this podcast, they're just as true today. Stat 6 still exists. There are nuclear bombs embedded under the Atlantic Ocean along the harbor of New York as I speak. There are Russian fighter jets flying sorties off the Pacific coast as I speak. There are Chinese organizations and covert agencies that are hacking into military installations, hacking into financial systems, hacking into all sorts of private property and intellectual property. So I don't want you to get complacent and think that this isn't a concern. This may be a bigger deal than the alternatives. So keep your eyes to the sky, keep your ear to the ground, and stay tuned for more information. I'll be back with another full-length episode in very short order here. I've got a lot of things on deck, some interviews that I think you'll all enjoy, as well as some research that I've been doing that is truly fascinating. I mean fascinating, guys. I hope you think so too, but You'll find out soon enough what I'm talking about, but just to give you a little teaser here, I've been reading a lot of the histories by Herodotus, and I'm finding some things in there that, I mean, I thought I knew Herodotus, and this is why you should never take somebody's just opinion of something before you read it for yourself, because people would always give me a synopsis of what, ancient writers like Herodotus would say, and I'd just kind of take the Cliff Notes version that they gave me and not read it. Well, I actually got around to reading it myself, and there is stuff that nobody told me about that is wild. And when I say wild, I mean like the entire ancient world looked so different than what you think. So different than what you think. And I'll leave it at that because I don't want to give away any of the thunder of the episodes that are gonna follow about that. But high strangeness in the ancient world. We'll leave it at that. High strangeness indeed. And some of it might tie into paranormal conspiracies as recent as the 20th century. So stay tuned for more information, because I have kind of a eureka theory that was exciting enough to get me out of bed to actually take notes as I read it a few nights ago. So that'll be coming in the future as I consolidate my thoughts. In the meantime, be healthy, be happy. Thank you for the support. Thank you for listening, and be well, everybody. We'll talk again soon. Bye.
Time, past, present, and future exists all at once.